I'd get an email to say, hey, Winston, on Monday, you need to be in Liverpool. So for me to get from point A to point B, I'm probably waking up 2 hours before my colleague to get to the same place.
Must have been really exhausting.
Yeah, it was. And I think that's eventually what led to my burnout in the end. And I'm fortunate that I also had this passion for speaking that developed at the same time. But I think a big part of it was to be able to create a lifestyle where I was more in control of my environment and of the type of work that I do.
You'll spend 80,000 hours at work. You're here because you want those hours to count. Hi, I'm Zoe Schofield.
And I'm Erica Sosna. A warm welcome to the Career Equation podcast. On this podcast, we take time out from our award-winning careers consultancy to share a game-changing formula to help you solve the sum of your life.
Each week, we and our guests use the Career Equation to explore their story so far and help them unlock the secrets of a fulfilling career.
Welcome, everyone, to the Career Equation podcast. And today I'm so excited to be with my friend and colleague, Winston Ben Clements. Winston is a motivational speaker, a content creator, and an internationally recognized disability advocate. Since 2018, he's been supporting companies like Ernst & Young, Google, Disney, and BAT in building organizations that are truly inclusive for all. Winston was born with osteogenesis imperfecta, commonly known as brittle bones, and he's experienced over 200 fractures in his lifetime. He's just 3 feet tall and uses a wheelchair for his day-to-day mobility. Despite this, Winston has taken a stand for a quality of life that knows no excuses and no limits. And his incredible story has impacted millions of people worldwide through his keynote speeches, webinars, and TED Talks. So I am very excited to have him here today. Welcome, Winston.
Hey, thanks for having me, Erica.
And of course, we met through the speaker education world. Both of us went, in fact, from a standing start in relation to speaking to large audiences.
It was definitely a very new chapter for me, and especially when I compare it to what I was doing previously in the tech industry. So I graduated with a degree in computer science. So all of my roles for the previous 9 years before we met were highly technical. So a lot of software engineering, a lot of software quality assurance. The turning point was where, as I developed in my career and progressed, I found myself being required to have more client meetings. And so I realized that in order to speak to clients, I'd have to actually have conversations with people and not just computers. And so for me, public speaking and even just conversations to a small group was something that I was really nervous about. And so I took up something called Toastmasters, which was a public speaking meetup. And I guess along that journey, I did my TED Talk. And I think it was in that learning season that I had was where we met each other and started a whole new career for me.
So many of our coaching clients come to us at a point of choice and confusion in their career. Maybe you're thinking it's too late to make a change, or you know that you want to, but just have no idea what roles would suit you. A nice exercise for this is called 5 lives. Imagine that you could choose 5 parallel lives or careers with no limits. It doesn't need to be realistic. Let's say I choose astronaut, dancer, talk show host, doctor, and medicine woman. Once you have 5 written down, ask yourself what aspect of you makes each one of those appealing. So the astronaut might be about your sense of adventure, the dancer about your desire for self-expression. See if you can find the 5 experiences or the aspects of self that energized you and prompted you to choose those alternative jobs. And then ask yourself, what kind of roles could give me those experiences or let me use more of those skills? And you might find that actually on the back of this, you have a lot more clarity about what you're looking for and what's going to make a really good fit.
Fantastic. And I think this is a great introduction and story as well, because lots of people listening are thinking about starting something new and thinking, oh, it's too late, it's too difficult, it's too much of a pivot. And especially that you stepped into something that was actually very frightening for you before and that you've now become quite accomplished in. Do you have any advice for people listening and thinking about making those kinds of changes?
Some of the best conversations I would have would be with another person with a disability or even with a disabled person and they would ask about my story, my journey, and I could see that was either inspiring to them or it opened their mind to a new experience that they might not have been familiar with before. And that sense of reward, I felt it most when I was sharing my story. So when I started doing Toastmasters and speaking on stages, there was almost an immediate confirmation because as soon as I shared my story on stage, I then had that same feeling of reward, but on a bigger scale. So I guess the advice would be finding out what your thing is that gives you that intrinsic sense of reward and then explore different ways to bring it out. In my case, it was public speaking that ended up being a vehicle for me to share that message.
I love that idea of expanding out from a core moment that already feels profound and great in your day-to-day life and going, what's the 100 times version of that? How could I expand that out and make it larger? And the equation is all about helping people to discover this sense of both purpose, but also design. What are you designed for is probably at the heart of thriving in the equation. And then what drives that sense of value and impact, what makes that unique design worth working on and working with. And then how does the environment bring out the best in you? And I know that actually your question for coming on today is a little bit of an environmental one.
Yeah, so my family and I moved to the US in 2022. And the big question I've been thinking is reestablishing myself, my purpose, my business. Previously in the UK, I found some stability. I found some community through other speakers like yourself, Erica, and it felt quite stable. But moving across the ocean, I'm starting again. I'm building connections. So I guess that is the question. How do I think about this in a new environment and also through the lens of what is my purpose at this stage of my career?
Great. And just for those who are learning a little bit about the speaking world and life, can you share a little bit about where your work has previously come from?
So previously, most of my opportunities have been with large organizations. So when I think back, even after doing my TED Talk in 2018, the first people I reached out to naturally were people from companies I had worked at before. And so I think what started then was almost a snowball where if you do a good job for a company in a particular niche or industry, then it's more likely that you're going to get more opportunities through referrals in that same sector.
So actually it came much more through your network than through agents and third parties.
So initially, yeah. And then as it developed and also when I got married, we also started doing a bunch of stuff on social media. And people would find me through content that we posted. LinkedIn has also been another good source for people reaching out to me. So I'd say as I started to put out more content and be more visible, I started to get reach outs from people who were further afield.
So let's dive into the experiences and the equation formula process and see what insight it can bring for us. For those who are listening for the first time, the equation defines thriving at work. And it explores 4 key components that over 20 years of career coaching, I've found to be the most important factors or considerations for designing a career that really works for you. So the equation says that we want to combine finding out what our strengths are and playing to those as much as we can with what we love, what gives us energy, what gives us joy, and then creating a result, an impact that is meaningful to us as an individual. And these 3 things help us to know the unique design of the person that we're working with. And then the 4th and perhaps most important component is to say, what are the environments that support this person to be at their best? Wherever possible, we try to reduce the amount of friction between the environment that they have and the environment that supports them to be at their best. So we say that you are thriving at work when you combine your skills with your passion and your impact, and you have an environment that really helps you to flourish. So let's take some time to explore your skills. Tell me about a time, preferably when you were fairly young, where you discovered that you were naturally good at something.
Yeah, fairly young is a long time ago now. But the one that popped into my mind was when I was younger. So I grew up in an African household, and I'm sure it's not just exclusive to African households, but I had a dad who would give monetary rewards for good grades at school. And there was literally a number assigned to each grade. And so that, of course, really motivated me to try hard at school, because I guess even back then, as a 6 or 7 year old, I knew money was a good thing. And so what I would do is, with whatever money, with my revenue from this business that I had, I would use a lot of it to buy toys. And I particularly loved those remote controlled cars. So after a while, even after working so hard at school, collecting all that money from my parents, spending that money on these toys, it would reach a point where I'd be bored of those toys. For me, the thing that kind of felt interesting to me was to actually break apart my toys and just understand how they were made and what was actually behind those four screws. And oftentimes my parents used to complain because they'd come home and there'd be a screwdriver and the whole toolkit would be out, screws all over the floor. And a lot of the time when I took the toys apart, that's it, they were ruined. But on the one or two occasions when I could actually put it back together, I almost felt like an inventor in a way. I remember even my parents maybe started to respect me a little bit. And so when something went wrong with one of the gadgets in the house, my mom would be like, hey, why don't you just take this apart and see if you can figure out what's not working.
I love this image of you on the floor covered with nails and plastic and ephemera. Does it still give you a lot of pleasure to dismantle things and put them back together?
I think I do have a very analytical approach, even to things like speaking. I really like the idea of just reverse engineering things, because I think there are clues into how the most successful people do things. And I study speakers whose style that I like. I look for the most minute details in their timing. And then previously to that, when I was an engineer, a software engineer, I guess this was more natural because I was in a place where I was having to solve problems for our clients and build solutions, software solutions that would cater to those problems.
So it really is part of your thought pattern, like your neurology. Have you applied that to social media?
So even with social media, I probably spend more time in the analytics than I do making videos. So it's a blessing and a curse. So sometimes you can get too lost in the details. But I think what's also helped me is having support from other people looking into those aspects that are not necessarily my zone of genius.
And let's talk a little bit about how that manifests itself in relation to things that you love.
Another passion of mine, particularly when I was younger, was drawing. And so I remember this one time I did, a picture of my parents, and I just sketched it out, and I got it to a pretty good likeness. At least that's what whatever 8-year-old me thought. And I remember showing it to my parents, and they were extremely proud. And I remember even my dad tried to draw something with me, and he wasn't really someone who did that kind of thing. He's from a different generation. And so for me, that resonated because even my father being so proud and wanting to take part in what I was doing was like, wow, this is something that's potentially really powerful, because I've never seen him interact with us in that way before.
And I think there's a real virtuous circle between strengths and passions, because we get good at something and that gives us joy. The thing gives us joy and we enjoy getting better at it. And there's this kind of symbiotic relationship between the two things. And very nicely, in terms of the equation completion, you have an impact in the world on the back of that.
Yeah, it's something that when I think back was like, oh, wow, I could probably count on one hand those types of experiences that I had with especially my father. And so to think that I contributed to that in some way, I think is a very, very special memory for me, especially now that he's no longer here.
Yeah. And how much drawing do you do now?
It's something that I've recently started to dabble in again, because I've got a child who's now 3, so she's really interested in drawing. And so I think it's taken me some time to almost give myself permission to do that again.
Yeah, start scribbling alongside her. I wonder how much the reintroduction of drawing might play a part in some of your communication going forward.
Oh, wow, that's interesting. Drawing is almost opposite to my typical posture, which is very analytical. And so drawing is using the more creative part of my brain. I think you can have both coexisting, but I would say especially since working in the corporate world for almost 10 years and then starting a business, although it's a speaking business, so there is some creativity there. There is also the back end of just building a business, whereas drawing, I feel, brings out the more kind of playful experimentation side to me, which I think was just buried in adulthood and career stuff and trying to become a grown up. And I like that I can also incorporate that into how I speak and how I communicate, and maybe try not to be as rigid or as overly prepared, and trust that I've got enough experience now to just share things off the cuff when I'm on the stage, for example.
It seems like there's both the opportunity to tap into that creative element of yourself in how you do things.
The one thing I would say about drawing is when I'm fully present and doing it, even when I'm just coloring with my daughter, I think even in and of itself, that's a pretty huge thing to get out of any activity.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting into flow and just being able to be present is a rare gift. So we talk about this in the equation, we call it impact. But tell me about a time where you thought, actually, what I'm doing really matters. It's really making a difference and it's landing in a way that is exciting to me and meaningful to me.
Yeah, when I started sharing my story publicly and feeling that little buzz or reward internally and thinking, oh, that was really scary, but I wouldn't mind doing this again. And so the example that comes to mind is that 2018 TED Talk was the first time I really shared my story to a large audience. I believe there were about 100 people who attended that TED Talk. And for me, that would have been unthinkable even just a few months before that, not only to speak to such a large group at the time, but also to share things that were extremely vulnerable, to paint the picture. And even some of my closest family, although they were obviously aware of my situation because we'd grown up together, these are not conversations that we were having at all on a day-to-day basis. So it almost felt like I publicized my conversation with a therapist or something. That's what it felt like.
Yeah.
And so for me, that was pretty big and pretty scary, and also healing as well, because it just allowed me to reflect on some of the things that I had experienced in my life and the lessons that I learned in creativity, in resilience, in overcoming adversity. And then to be able to pull out those lessons and see that it was having a meaningful impact on people in the audience, most of whom were not disabled. I think for me, that felt really powerful. And when this one was published on YouTube, I was already buzzing and feeling really proud of having shared the story. But I remember people saying not only were they touched by my story, but that it shifted their mind in some way. Either they're going to take a step and maybe even reach out to a person who's disabled and try and get to know them, not just judge them based on appearance. Or even others who said, I have a child, a son, a daughter, a friend who's disabled, and hearing your career and your progress has made me have so much hope and belief for them. And I'm actually going to go ahead and share this with them. And so for me, that kind of feedback was really powerful because it took it away from it being about me so much into it being the kind of impact that can be scaled and have a ripple effect to help a lot more people.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I think do check out the TED Talk if you haven't already, listeners. It's very moving and engaging, and how wonderful to touch people so much further afield. And that's just such a beautiful ripple effect, as you described. So let's take up the last mantle, which is environment. What kind of environments have proven really challenging or prevented you from feeling like you can easily be at your best?
So initially when I started my career in technology, I worked for a financial services firm, and I was based in an office in London. So Monday to Friday, I'd be going to the same office every day, working with the same people, and really became familiar with that environment and felt quite supported in that environment because people got to know me, I got to know them. For me, as someone who uses a wheelchair, figuring out the building, what works, what doesn't, restrooms, cafeteria, all of that stuff, we were able to get to a really stable place that I felt at home there, if I can say it that way. And then when I left that job to look for a different opportunity, I ended up working for a consulting company. And I'm sure there's a few consultants listening to this, but as with consulting, you're not really placed in a fixed building. A lot of the time, you're going to be stationed to wherever your client is based because you're coming in to consult with the client in their premises and help them to figure out some kind of problem that they have and come up with a solution for it. And so that part of the job really excited me, which is what I wanted to try as an experience. That feeling of, hey, I could be not just working for one company for many years, but in a single year, I could get to work with 3 or 4 clients and learn about 3 or 4 different industries and solve different types of problems and hopefully become really skilled at my problem solving and my technical skills through learning different things at a fast pace. What I hadn't factored in was how challenging it would be for someone with a disability to navigate the logistics of getting from A to B to C to D back to A all the time. Being based in London at short notice, I get an email to say, hey, Winston, on Monday, you need to be in Liverpool. And then after that, you're going to be in Birmingham. And so I think for me, that environment is also something that really fuels my passion for disability advocacy.
This resonates so much for me personally. Employers, remember, if you're in a differently abled body, the simple act of just getting around might take twice as long and take twice as much energy, almost to the extent of constituting another part-time job for your employees with disabilities. Before you send someone off on an exciting assignment, just take time to check in about what that might mean for them in getting around, finding accessible ways of doing things, and generally being outside of their comfort zone. We as disabled people just need to know that you understand what our accommodations and challenges are. That doesn't mean we don't want to take the adventure. We just need to explore together how to do it effectively and differently. This can, of course, also be true if someone's returning after ill health, going through the menopause, experienced a bereavement or another kind of life change. To have the humanity to be curious about the whole person helps to drive performance, retention, and a genuinely caring culture.
Accessibility, especially when we talk about transport equity and just travel equity in general. So having to figure out that, okay, I could use the train system. It's just that I had to do 10 times more planning than the average person. And so for me to get from point A to point B, which would probably take the average person an hour, I may have to navigate a different route to find all the accessible stations. And that same journey will take me 3 hours. So if it's a 3-hour journey, it means I'm probably waking up 2 hours before my colleague to get to the same place. I guess maybe the challenging part of that environment was it feeling almost like a second job, just getting to and from work.
Yeah, no, I completely relate to that idea of the whole extra load of just getting yourself somewhere. I say now, I can never just do something. Prior to the accident and becoming paraplegic, I would just go to the library, just pop to the shops, just get on a plane, and that there is no just left. So I can imagine that being on the road in that consulting way, day in, day out, must have been really exhausting.
Yeah, it was. And I think that's eventually what led to my burnout in the end. And I'm fortunate that I also had this passion for speaking that developed at the same time. But I think a big part of it was to be able to create a lifestyle where I was more in control of my environment and of the type of work that I do.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, great. Let's try putting everything together and seeing what we get in terms of your equation. The good thing is, so I'm going to ask you to fill in some gaps, but the good thing is the first one is your name. So you don't have to give any thought to that. So I'm going to say I, and you're going to say
Winston.
You're a winner. Will use my skills. I like to start, put the bar low and then amp it up for everybody. Will use my skills in. So I'd like you to think about what are the 2 or 3 most fundamental skills that you want to see actioned at a high level in your work?
I would say creativity. I would say analysis. And I would say problem solving.
Great. I use my skills in creativity, analysis, and problem solving. And my passion for. So I know there's going to be probably some overlap, but where would you go when I asked you, what's the passion driving things?
I'd say my passion is for inclusivity.
Mm-hmm. a passion for inclusivity. 2, and here's where we put the impacts and the kind of global results you want to have. So how would you describe what it's all for when it comes down to it there?
I would summarize it as to help people with disabilities live a life on their own terms.
Beautiful. Okay. An environment that is blank works best for me. An environment that is, tell me what needs to be in there. Now we've talked about some of the things that have been really hard to manage.
Honestly, I would summarize it as empathy, because if you have empathy, then you are designing not just for yourself, but for others.
Anything else you'd have in there?
Yeah, so inclusive thinking and kindness.
Kindness. That's great. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read it back to you so that you can capture it either in your head or written down, and then read it and then say it back. Because usually when you say it, it helps us to really pinpoint, have you got what you need? I, Winston, will use my skills in creativity, analysis and problem solving, and my passion for inclusivity to help people with disabilities to live a life on their own terms. An environment that is empathic, has inclusive thinking, and is filled with kindness works best for me. Will you have a go at playing that back so we can hear you?
I could remember it, yeah. I, Winston, will use my skills in creativity, analysis, and problem solving, and my passion for inclusivity to help people with disabilities create a life that is to be lived on their own terms. And the environments that work best for me are those that are full of empathy, kindness, and inclusive thinking.
Beautiful. How do you feel hearing that?
That feels really good. And I think for me, it also cements in terms of what I feel is my calling and my mission is around that inclusivity and accessibility piece, and supporting people who might have faced a similar situation that I have, because disability is not just a thing that touches people like you or me, but it touches everyone in some way at some point in their life. I think there's a stat that I read, which is that 80% of disabilities are acquired. Only 20% of disabilities happen from birth. Chances are that someone listening to this will either be impacted themselves or somebody really close to them will experience something where they might need this kind of support.
Beautifully stated. What score would you give for where you're currently living on it, with 1 being not at all and 10 being absolutely?
So I'd give it a 6 because I just feel like I could do more to not just support organizations, but also recently I'm starting to get involved in more grassroots type of projects and really trying to have a local impact, because it's one thing for me to go and support the staff at Google or Facebook and make sure that they're fine. But for me, it feels almost remiss to not also see what's happening locally and then factoring that in as I design my speeches or as I think about what governments and companies could do.
Yeah, just starting where you are and being of service to that local community. So if you were going to take it to a 7 or an 8, what now occurs to you as the kind of levers that you could push to start nudging that up to those higher numbers?
There is still a lot of stuff which is on my plate, which I think I would be better served and would allow me to have more impact if that was outsourced to somebody else. Try and figure out what are the things in the business where I am the bottleneck and those things don't necessarily move the mission forward.
Yeah, really focusing your attention on the things that can only be done by Winston and that other things that might potentially be done very successfully and perhaps more streamlined and effectively and better by somebody else. Anything else you'll take away from the discussion that you think you'll start playing with in your business?
Yeah, I think on the creativity side, the drawing and tapping into that inner child part of me, it's made me look at, even when I play with my daughter, look at that through a different lens and see it as something that is not just, oh, we're just killing some time here before she goes to take a nap, but it's actually something that is really helping me grow as a person also. So just looking at it through a lens of more value. And I think also just an appreciation for the impact that you can have, or going back to that experience of me breaking apart my toys and then building them together, putting it back together, and realizing that as I show myself and my skills, what I'm able to do, what I'm trying to do, what I'm looking to create, then it attracts other people to that mission. So when I was younger, the people that got pulled in were my family members who would say, why don't you try the hairdryer or this other thing, and help us in that way.
And I read the statistic recently that said that fathers these days spend 700% more time with their children than our dads did. And I really hear in your decision to really show up and draw with your little girl. Your father couldn't, whether just through all of the labor that he was doing, or just the background that he had that said, I drop in, I say something useful, I spend a spot of time and I'm gone again. And my father worked a lot of jobs. He was the first generation migrant as well. I worked 3 jobs. It feels like a kind of paying forward to have the space and time to really show up with your art skills and share with your girls some great doodling time. I feel like you've already given us loads of like really useful tidbits about experimentation and creativity. But if I were to ask you to speak back to little Winston, pulling apart his toys and screwing them all back together, what advice would you give him about how to engage with life and work to get the most out of it?
One is what I touched on about, this might look like a big pile of debris and mess, but you are learning something through this. So ignore what the haters are saying, basically. And then I think, secondly, I had a feeling when I was younger that I was missing out on a lot of stuff. And maybe I was, but I think just learning that everything happens for a reason and we're all on a separate journey. As much as things might look uniform for everybody else, everybody is on their own journey. So just trust the process and keep leaning into those things that give you that internal buzz, that feeling that you're helping or that you're doing a good thing for other people, and you will end up where you're supposed to end up.
Thank you, Winston. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you today. And the best places to find you, I'm guessing, are winstonclements.com and The Clements on YouTube. And Winston Speaker is your kind of tag. We'll make sure we've got all of those in the show notes. But it just remains to say thank you so much for participating in the Career Equation Formula. And I wish you every success over the pond.
Thank you. This was really fun.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Career Equation podcast.
Stay connected with us on socials for more career insights, behind-the-scenes moments, and updates on upcoming episodes. And if you'd like to work with us, visit the Career Equation website or click the links in the show notes.
Remember, the Career Equation isn't just a podcast, it's a journey towards unlocking your full potential, enjoying your life, and doing remarkable stuff.
Until next time, keep solving those career equations and pursuing your path to success.
And don't forget to share your thoughts and feedback with us. Your input shapes the future of our show.
Until next time, keep solving those career equations and pursuing your path to success. This is Erica Sosna
And Zoe Schofield. Signing off.